Oh, that's good there, good expansive build run. Maybe just throws it a bit tighter, but it still lands. Here from Wilder, good left hook as well from Wilder.
Oh, it's gone down. He's gone down. He's gone down.
Hey, Top Boxing News.
D'ailleurs, peut-être un peu plus chez Viviane.
Et là, Maidana se fait
start with this. Well, it appears that Marcos Maidana would like to fight 3 times this year. In what remains of this year, it being that, well, we're well within 2019. You understand? But it appears that Marcos would like to fight 3 times this year. Once in June, once in September, and again in December. And one can make the inference that if he's going to be fighting on a schedule like that, that is so tightly packed, that those fights would all have to be tune-up fights.
All of them.
Or at minimum, that at least 2 of those fights would have to be tune-up fights. Because on a schedule like that, it can be very physically taxing, especially for a guy who's on the comeback trail. You're not going to fight killers back-to-back on a schedule like that. So if you intend to keep a schedule like that, those would all have to be tune-up fights. Or at minimum, the first 2 would have to be tune-up fights. Tune-up fights for Marcos Maidana, who when he arrived, weighed in at about 218 pounds. Currently, he's at about 187. So there's still a lot of work needs doing, especially if he intends to fight in June.
That ain't far away.
But if he does, and all goes well, and he does fight 3 times this year, in what remains of this year, you can see that, all right, those ain't gonna be killers. Them first 2 fights, the first one obviously is not gonna be a killer. But if you want to have a fight in June and then another in September, then the fight in September, that can't be a killer either. You're not gonna be ready to fight killers in that time.
No way.
Things may not even get interesting for Marcos unless, you know, that they may not get interesting this year, and if they do, it would have to be in December. Those first 2 fights, those are throwaway fights. Those are tune-up fights. Those are fights that would have to be geared towards shaking off the cobwebs, shaking off the ring rust, and getting Marcos in fully functioning order.
Yeah, pretty much.
I will say that there is a certain novelty to seeing Marcos Maidana's name being reintegrated into these kinds of conversations. That his name is being reintegrated alongside names like Keith Thurman and Sean Porter and Manny Pacquiao, who's still floating around. Manny Pacquiao, who we all know, that's the kind of fight that Marcos is back for. That's the kind of fight that he's looking for. And there's a certain novelty seeing the name of Marcos Maidana being reintegrated into these conversations, because in the subsequent years after his retirement in 2014, there was a desire expressed by the fans to see Marcos return, because they know what he's capable of, or at least what he was capable of. They know what he can do, that he can make a finesse fighting, chess playing fighter very uncomfortable. Whether he wins the fight or he loses the fight, it's still going to be an entertaining fight. And it's for that reason that there was a desire expressed after Marcos retired that he come back, that the fans would very much like to see him come back. There's a novelty to seeing his name being reintegrated back into the mix. But in spite of that novelty, I'll say this. After that duration of time away from the ring, which is roughly about 4 years, I mean, if it's not 4 years today, it may be by the time Marcos actually has a fight. After that duration of time away from the ring, there's no telling if Marcos Maidana can get back to the fighter that he used to be. And when your motivation is really just finance, because, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. If Marcos Maidana is back here, it's not for no reason. He's looking for paydays. And I think that that's pretty much the focal point of his return. When that is the motivating factor, as opposed to the enthusiasm and fire and desire of a younger man, a younger man who hasn't been through the ringer, a younger man who is nowhere near as experienced as Marcos, it's different. The mentality is different. Both fighters would be looking for a payday, but the younger man, looking to make a name for himself, he fights with a different kind of desire. Whereas Marcos, it's a little bit more straightforward. We know what Marcos is back here looking for. And for you to try to reintegrate yourself in the elite welterweight conversation, for you to be a part of that, you got to try to recapture some of that fire. It can't just be about the money. It can't just be about the paydays, because it's a very dangerous sport, very punishing sport. Marcos Maidana's no stranger to this stuff. Very experienced guy. You're back here after a 3 or 4 year hiatus. But it can't all just be about money. Not if you're going to get back to the fighter that you used to be. You have to fall back in love with the sport. And there's no telling whether or not he could do that. Essentially, what I'm getting at is all the novelty that we're feeling right now, that novel sensation of seeing the name of Marcos Maidana being brought up yet again after all these years. All that novelty could quickly evaporate
Once he actually has a fight.
in Marcos's second or third tune-up fight. The first one, you could write that one off. That you can't expect a guy to look great his first fight after all those years. You know, if Marcos comes back, he looks rusty. Well, we're expecting him to look rusty in his first fight. But in the second fight, people are going to look to see, okay, has there been any improvement from the first fight? Do you still look the same? And even if there are if there are people out there, say the guy goes out there in what is his second tune-up fight, and he's still not really looking like he's got it together. Even if there are some people out there that would give him a pass on that, by the third one, you're gonna need to see significant improvement, because today's welterweight division has no shortage of talent, and given the names that he means to fight, he really is gonna have to recapture that old flame. That novelty that we're seeing right now could quickly evaporate if he doesn't. If he goes out there and he actually looks like a guy who's been away too long, but not in the first fight, let's say the second or the third. I'll tell you, I don't know if he could really do it. I don't know if he could get back to being the fighter that he used to be. Maybe he can. I mean, look at what Tyson Fury did. He had 2 tune-ups before that Wilder fight, but he put on a hell of a performance in that Wilder fight. He really showed that he still got it. So with that in mind, I'm not going to write off Marcos Maidana and say that he can't get back there. I don't know that he can get back there.
No.
All we can do is wait and see if he can get back there. But what I will say is that there's a bit of pressure. This is a very live welterweight division. You have to understand that there are no paths of least resistance given what Marcos is coming from. There are no easy titles to win. There are no titles of opportunity. For Marcos, least of all, whether it's a Keith Thurman or an Errol Spence or a Sean Porter or a Terrence Crawford, if you have any aspirations of becoming a world champion, you're going to have to go through the fire. And for Marcos, we just don't know if he's still able to do that.
And we're just breaking myself back down. I'm breaking myself back down to the basics, and I'm going that way. I'm doing a lot
What does that mean? Because I spoke to Jay yesterday. He said that you guys are going back to the basics. That you wanted to go back to the basics. So what's that mean?
Basically, I've been getting away with a lot of things. As a champion, and just as a fighter in general, with my style, with my technique, with my height, there's a lot of things that I get away with that I know I can get away with. You know what I'm saying? It's just like training. After I won my title, you know what I mean, slowly but surely, things started to get like, damn. It wasn't to the point where I didn't have to do certain things no more. It was to the point where I felt like I'm going to challenge myself. You know what I mean? Certain things that I didn't do in the gym. You know what I mean? Y'all seen it. I'll come in here and just hit the mitts and spark. And that's it. No running, conditioning and stuff, no roll work, none of that, no heavy bag really, no speed bag, no jump rope, no nothing. People don't know this though. That's all I've ever done. Hit the mix and spar, 2 things. Now when you finna get ready to go into a fight or whatever, and most of you guys have camps, usually they camp 8 to 12 weeks. They doing every fucking thing, hitting every bag in the motherfucking gym. I didn't have to do that. And I still knocking people out.
This is a recent interview conducted with Deontay Wilder ahead of his upcoming fight with Dominic Brazeale. And in the video, y'all heard it. He only really does 2 things, or at least he's only really been doing 2 things to prepare for a fight. Sparring and mitt work.
According to him.
But ahead of this fight, he's going back to the basics. He's breaking himself down. Essentially, he's doing things for this fight differently that he hasn't been doing in the past. And the question is why? What's different about this fight? What could spark a change in how Deontay Wilder prepares for a fight
All of a sudden,
if in spite of not doing a whole bunch of things, he's been getting knockouts? Why the change? And I'll tell you why there's a change.
tell us!
That Deontay Wilder, in his last fight, didn't get the knockout. He didn't get the knockout against Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury, who he knocked down 2 times, he just didn't keep him down.
He couldn't.
There was some controversy after that fight. There's no need to beat around the bush. We know that there were varying opinions post-fight, and that a lot of people felt that, you know what, yeah, you knocked Tyson Fury down 2 times, but he did enough to win a decision. There were a lot of people that felt that, you know, since that thing went the full course and they saw the aesthetic of the fight, that Tyson Fury did enough, and you know, he got robbed, yada yada yada, whatever. The point is that for the knockout puncher who's relying on the knockout to win him the fight, well, when the knockout don't win you the fight, do you have the boxing acumen to win a decision? Do you have what it takes to win on points, to make it decisive to where you can win on points without being so reliant on one-hitter-quitter power? I think that that's what's motivating the change. I think that that's the reason that here we see Deontay Wilder, who is 40-something fights in to his professional career, and he's going back to the basics.
Going back.
I mean, if anything, this should be a point in time where he is adding things or refining things that are already in his repertoire. Yet what we're seeing is he's going back to the basics.
The basics.
You've been having success for 40 or 41 fights. If you've been having success for that duration of time,
Relying on your power.
then you may tell yourself that if it ain't broke,
Relying on your power.
don't fix it. But it just so happens that Deontay Wilder has suffered breaks to that knockout arm. He has suffered several breaks. And that in the Tyson Fury fight, he found that he could not get full extension off his punches, that his corner was asking him, you know, why doesn't he straighten out his arm? He was experiencing difficulties in that arm, and ahead of a fight with Brazeale, coming from that performance against Fury, that might spark you to want to do things differently, to want to go back to the basics, because you're not going to be able to win every fight the same way. Oftentimes when Deontay Wilder is the subject on this channel, we don't really talk about his implementation as much as we talk about other factors involving other things. But in the realm of Deontay Wilder and discussing him as a specimen, as a subject, and what he does in the ring to win those fights, you have to realize that Deontay Wilder and his frame is not as sturdy as some others. You know, he just doesn't have the body mass that a lot of guys have in the heavyweight division. He's one of the more slender heavyweights in the entire weight class, and he's the smallest of the heavyweight champions. You know, he's a smaller guy than Anthony Joshua. He's a smaller guy than the lineal champion, Tyson Fury. You think about that. You got this guy with this slender frame connecting devastating punches on men who are 200 plus pounds, and how his bones have to absorb the brunt of those impacts. It's not just the guys getting hit that are getting hurt. He's getting hurt by that too. You think about form, you think about technique, the proper way to throw a punch, and cross-compare that with Deontay Wilder's implementation. He's not a conventional fighter and doesn't throw conventional punches by any stretch of the imagination. That perhaps a part of the reason that he's experienced these breaks over the years, perhaps a part of the reason that that arm might be deteriorating, is lack of proper form when throwing a punch. I mean, we know that form really isn't Deontay Wilder's strong suit, and for him, maybe he's got to break the conventional methods of shooting a shot in order to generate that knockout power. But in doing so,
He gets injured.
he has caused those breaks to happen indirectly. So ahead of a fight with Dominic Brazeale, who is actually a bit on the durable side, you understand, took Anthony Joshua some work, took him a few rounds to get Brazeale out of there. Okay, that's what Brazeale does have. You know, he's not the most offensive guy, doesn't have a lot of flash. You don't walk away from a Brazeale fight remembering something. But one thing that he does have is he's a durable guy. I mean, he's a big, sturdy guy. And ahead of a fight with him, in junction with all the other names that are in the hat right now, other things that are being conversed about.
An AJ fight.
You know, with Wilder's team and other teams, and what the fans are discussing, what they are expecting to see of Deontay Wilder
Fury rematch.
in regards to other fighters. Ahead of all these different things that are happening simultaneously, it may have occurred to Wilder that you can't go into this stage of your career thinking that you're gonna keep getting away with the same shit and not pay for it. You're gonna have to do things differently. You're not gonna beat all these guys the way you beat Spilka, the way you beat Stavern, all these different guys that are out there. That worked on them because those guys are a certain caliber of fighter. And for the next phase of whatever is left of your career, you're going to have to do things differently because that arm has sustained some punishment. 7 surgeries to the same arm. That could easily turn into 8 in this upcoming Brazeale fight. That could easily turn into 8. The limitations of Deontay Wilder's skill set and how robust it's not, how malleable he isn't as a fighter, how he seems to rely on instinct, and that's gotten him by so far, but that may have a lot to do with the kind of people that he's been fighting for the better portion of his career. These kinds of particulars encompass the conversation ahead of us right now. Wilder let it be known he goes into a camp, he's basically preparing by doing 2 things, primarily just 2 things. And that helps to explain how he could have gotten to this point where he's like 41 fights in, but you still see the same limitations, the same holes in his in his technique, the same reliance on the big right hand. That if there wasn't growth, and there isn't growth, it's because he hasn't done anything to grow. Or he may have a better understanding of his range. Perhaps there's some growth there that, he knows when to shoot the shot, but aside from shooting that shot, okay, what else can you do? I think that lends some intrigue to the Brazeale fight in the sense that, people might look at his performance with a closer eye for detail to see, okay, well, you did things differently in camp for this fight, so let's see what effect that has the night of the fight. Because it does appear that Deontay Wilder's previous success with other opponents, the kind of guys that he's kept busy with over the years, those kinds of guys, certain caliber of guys, that the success he had against them has left him with a false sense of security that ultimately inhibited his growth and the growth of his skill set as a fighter. Now, several breaks and 7 surgeries later, he's put in a position to where he's got to go back to the basics. You got to start adding things to what you're doing because you can't keep relying on that same arm. You go into a fight with Brazeale and you experience the same difficulties you did in the Fury fight, getting full extension off that arm, and you may find yourself in a precarious situation because Brazeale is a durable guy. If nothing else, he is durable. He's not the most offensively blessed, and he's definitely not defensively blessed, but he is durable. Might take some work to get that guy out of there. And you and that guy actually have bad blood. Kind of situation that may spark a guy to be in rare form. So I'll tell you, it's a very curious development to hear those words coming out of Deontay Wilder's own mouth. They're going back to the basics. And these are some of the reasons that I think they're going back to the basics.